Hey, dickheads, like a pink laser beam of truth, jaunting straight from space to your brain hole. I am your host, David Agranoff, and I am here to talk to you today about a science fiction classic, The Star's My Destination by Alfred Bester. And if you're on YouTube, I've got the SF Masterworks version that I just finished reading. But the reason why I'm doing this book is because I literally have the author who wrote the book on the book returning to the DickHeads podcast, who you might remember from our Lies Inc. / the Unteleported Man episode, D. Harlan Wilson, Professor David Harlan Wilson of Wright State University and the author of many, many, many books, including his latest, The Star's My Destination, a literary companion. David, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, sir. Happy to be here again.
You've got a bunch of plays out recently too, and so definitely before we get into the Alfred Bester thing, do you want to tell the folks what your latest plays are?
Sure. The plays, it's just a collection of two plays called Jackanape and the Fingermen. And I actually, technically, yeah, there it is. And that was put out by the publishing company that I run, Anti-Oedipus Press. Now, I think that's the third book of mine that I put out through AOP. And I do that because every time I put out one of my own books, it's to experiment, do some sort of experiment. So in this case, I was trying do you have the hardcover?
I do not. I have the paperback.
So they had a new hardcover technology, and rather than experiment on one of my authors, I experimented on myself. So that's why I put it out through AOP. But I enjoy those plays, and one of them actually was published in the Cafe A Reel. And as I say, well, it's bullshit, but there's a foreword or an acknowledgement or something wherein I say that they've been, one of them at least was put on in Copenhagen. I forgot what I said in the actual
Right.
book. It didn't happen. I say more than that, as I tend to do. I lie, essentially. But yeah, that's, I didn't really promote that very much. This year I'm more involved. I have two books coming out, actually. The one we're going to talk about, that's out, the critical companion to Bester's The Star's My Destination, originally titled Tiger in the UK, and another monograph on Minority Report, which is, of course, based on the Philip K. Dick story for Auteur Publishing's Constellation series, which is, Auteur Publishing is an imprint of Liverpool University Press.
Right, and we already did an episode on Minority Report, but we'll talk about Minority Report at another time, but we're here to talk about Alfred Bester. So let's start off with, because, usually when we're talking Philip K. Dick, I know a lot about the biography of him, and I usually dive into the biography whenever we do a Dick adjacent. For example, like our last one was Lee Brackett. I did a lot of research into Lee Brackett beforehand, but because I was having you on, I decided I could let you do the biography of Alfred Bester. So can you tell us about Alfred Bester, the man?
I don't know. I recount some biographical information in the book. But I was just writing. So I'm currently at work on this as we were talking about this book on Kubrick. And one of the things that I do in that introduction is explain how so desperately, not desperately, but how uninterested I am in Kubrick the man. And that generally goes for most of the authors and artists that I really like, including even Philip K. Dick, although I must say his biography is more fascinating to me than most authors and artists. Bester, on the other hand, there's a great book written by Jad Smith who goes deep into the biography called, appropriately enough, Alfred Bester for University of Illinois Press's Modern Masters of Science Fiction series. I wrote that Ballard book for the same series.
I've read Jad Smith's John Brunner book.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Did he do that one too?
He did Brunner as well, yeah.
Oh, okay, that was the first one to come out in the series, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and it's great. Yeah.
So just some, brief background on Bester. He always sort of referred to himself as a working stiff, quote unquote, as a writer. he got involved with, I think he started in, let's say, 40s, 50s, and was involved with, he kind of started out in the science fiction genre, got sick of it, went on to do other things, working in comics and TV, came back to the science fiction genre, got sick of it again, went on to be an editor at, I think it was Holiday magazine. He did that for a while, came back to the science fiction genre, and this was in his later career, and I can't remember how old he was when he died. I think it was in 1987. Lived kind of from what I could tell, lived a hard life, liked to, drink and smoke and all of that, old school, and was sort of a perpetual curmudgeon in the same vein that Barry Malzberg is, especially with respect to the science fiction genre, which he wrote many essays on this, and I talk about them at length in my book, and I even, to some degree, try to adopt the tone of Bester's rancor towards the science fiction genre in my book. Although what I'm doing is, pretty much straight criticism, but I do amp it up a little bit.
Now, for longtime listeners of the DickHeads podcast might remember that Barry Malzberg referred to Alfred Bester as, quote, the very best among us. And then he said, quote, he was a son of a bitch, but I loved him, and he was the best among us.
Yeah, and I can't tell, honestly, though, I can't tell if he liked him or not. We were talking about how Barry's been emailing me as of late more frequently than usual. And that's what he does in his emails. He'll say, God, that Bester was a son of a bitch. God damn him. And then he'll say, well, he was a good guy and he did this, that, and the other. And, I'm kind of, I want Barry to I want to keep that stream of consciousness. There's like this thing going on with it. So I want to keep it going. And I don't know. I can't figure it out. And that's fine. I mean, Like I said, I actually prefer to know less of the authors that I really like. Once you, sometimes when you get to know them, so I'll say that I won't mention any names, but I have really enjoyed certain authors' work. And then when I got to know the authors, it sort of infected how I perceive their work. And I don't know as much. That's my problem, but nonetheless, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about Bester as like what he was doing before.
Oh, and incidentally, if I could, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
I don't think I'd like Bester one bit.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I never met him. And as I was writing this book, I struggled to, you have to convey some biographical information, but I kind of wanted to know as little about him personally as I could, because I really did, despite its many flaws, The Star's My Destination was a formative novel for me. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And look, as somebody who doesn't smoke, drink, is vegan, like you'd think that knowing much more about Philip K. Dick would have turned me off. But for part of it for me is that I find it so fascinating that he lived the way that he did and was able to be as productive as he was. But also to me,
he's an exception. Yeah.
Yeah. He was just such a fascinating character, of course. Now, as far as Bester goes, like before this novel came out, he didn't have a huge body of work. And even by the end of his life, he didn't have a huge body of work either. But what built up to The Star's My Destination / Tiger Tiger?
So the first book, this first novel, was The Demolished Man. And, since we announced this podcast on online, a lot of people have been chiming in as to whether the Demolished Man is often compared to The Star's My Destination. And you can kind of tell about people depending upon which one they like the most. But it's funny, people seem to have that need to express which one they like most because it says something about them in terms of their relationship with not just Bester, but with the science fiction genre, because they're both quite similar, yet they diverge considerably from one another. And one of my theses in the book is that The Demolished Man, which won what award was it? It won
it was the first Hugo Award winning novel.
Okay, right. It was Hugo.
Yeah. The first ever.
And The Stars did not win any big, The Stars My Destination didn't win any big awards, but I don't want to say that it's generally been perceived as the better book, although it kind of has. But the moment you say that, then people start chiming in saying, what the hell are you talking about? But in any case, one of my theses in the book is that The Stars My Destination is what Bester really wanted to do in The Demolished Man. And between The Demolished Man and Stars, he sort of found his voice and elevated among other things, the sort of experimental nature of that book and his writing, and the innovation that not only he wanted to employ in his own writing, but that he wanted to see more of in the science fiction genre.
I will say that that year Robert Heinlein won his first Hugo for Double Star, so he probably didn't have a chance to win in 56. And because I think that was a Lifetime Achievement Award that year.
I didn't even answer your question before in terms of how, he got into writing and stuff. I mean, like many science fiction writers, or any writer, he started selling stories in the magazines. And I forgot I don't think he published that many stories before The Demolished Man. But really, he only had, 6, 7 novels total. And after The Stars My Destination, you could say, I don't know, a lot of people say they were really unhappy with what he wrote. But as I argue in my book, he never wanted to do the same thing twice. If he did anything twice, it's The Demolished Man and The Stars My Destination. But again, The Stars My Destination, I say, again, this is my argument, is really what he wanted to sort of accomplish with The Demolished Man. But thereafter, he was just like me, and this is one of the reasons I like Bester. He always wanted to do something new. He was always looking for something new. Innovation was the thing. However, whatever he needed to do to enact that, he tried to do it.
Yeah, so let's talk about the origin of this novel. Now, I know you prefer the title Tiger, Tiger. And so it was released in the UK under the title Tiger, Tiger. It was released in the US as Tiger, Tiger, and the UK as Stars My Destination.
No, in the UK, Tiger, Tiger, which is from. So there's a lot of intertextuality in the novel. The three main intertexts are Blake's poem, The Tiger, which is where that original title comes from. Count of Monte Cristo, which provides basically the plot structure. And then James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which to varying degrees that Bill Dung's roman that Joyce enacts in his book, Bester sort of adopts it for his. There's a ton of other intertexts, but those are the dominant ones. And that original title comes from Blake's poem, which I, as you say, prefer. But in America, they went with the star. There's nothing science fictional about Tiger, Tiger. So they went with The Stars My Destination, which comes from that actually is a riff on a jingle. So Bester appropriated, basically there's this nursery jingle in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. That reads, and which is a novel about this dude, Stephen Dedalus. And that jingle reads, Stephen Dedalus is my name, Ireland is my nation, Clongaus, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, is my dwelling place, and heaven my expectation. I should know how to pronounce that. So Bester takes that jingle and applies it to his main character in The Stars My Destination, and it reads, Scully Foyle is my name, and Terra is my nation, deep space is my dwelling place, the stars my destination. And that he lifts that latter part for I don't think he did, an editor did, because basically the editor said Tiger, Tiger doesn't have anything science fictional about it. We want to market it in that capacity. Bester said, I don't give a shit, do what you want. And that's what they came up with. Because it's a little misleading. I remember when I was first told to read this book, The Stars My Destination. It's missing a verb or something, right? Mm-hmm. But it makes sense within the context of that stanza. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I gotta say, I personally prefer the title, just because Tiger Tiger, I get it now that I've read it, but I can understand that where the publisher might be like, that doesn't tell the reader anything about what they're going to get. And I think at least The Star's My Destination, especially because I personally think it says something about the final act of the book. And we can spoil the book and assume that at this point, if you've listened this far, you should know that we think it's worth you reading. You should go read it and come back if you haven't. Now, I know some people use these episodes as cliff notes for like wanting to know about the science fiction canon, but they're never planning on reading it. So just know that there are some people that are out there that are this is going to be all they know about it.
Yeah.
So
no, you're absolutely right that the U.S. title denotes it's, well, the Nietzschean, Zarathustrian space that Gully Foyle comes to inhabit at the end, right? He becomes a Kubrickian star child or something of this nature. Whereas Tiger Tiger points more towards basically what he has to overcome in himself in order to become that star child or whatever you want to call him at the end.
Right. Got it. Okay. So now,
well, I don't know, because at the beginning of Stars, Gully is stranded on a ship. Basically, what sets the whole narrative in motion is that somebody passes him by without picking him up. And he gets pissed. He becomes a tiger, so to speak, and goes from there. But I don't know if I think that comes more from, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say that the Count of Monte Cristo than anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the whole revenge.
That's where he took the lead for the plot.
Yeah, and that's the whole revenge storyline, which,
Sure.
The Count of Monte Cristo is like the ultimate revenge story, and we've seen so many revenge movies and things, and in the past. But in 1955, there wasn't as many revenge stories to build upon, and he was building upon, this classic. And what are some of the ways that he builds on the Count of Monte Cristo that may be less obvious than just the revenge part of it? Like, how is he commenting on it?
There's a big part of it is the Count of Monte Cristo. A large part of that narrative has the protagonist in jail, right? I forgot how long he's actually in there, but Gully spends quite a bit of time in this place called the Gouffre Martel. Again, I'm probably mispronouncing that, where he gets help from somebody like the protagonist in Count of Monte Cristo, who basically educates him and sets him on his journey towards enlightenment. In Stars, it's a woman named Gisbella McQueen, or Giz, as she's called. And they actually escape together, and eventually, as Gully does with all of the women in this book, he sort of uses them to better himself, and then, dumps them in the end.
And we'll talk about the misogyny in this book in greater depth later.
In your review, there's a lot of problems with representations of race and gender in this book, which I call out for sure.
There are lots of issues with those, and we'll get further into that. But like sticking with like the origin and the structure of this, there's a lot of Bester, for as critical as he is of science fiction, and I think one of the things that is lost for a lot of people is how he is commenting on the genre through the kind of meta text of this book. It's obvious that he has been reading the genre and that he's commenting on it. And I know I said in my review that unlike, there's a lot that it shares with some of the early science fiction. You can tell that Von Vogt was an influence on him, just like he was on PKD. Von Vogt was like the science fiction writer of the 40s. He is not as remembered as some of the ones that have lived on quite as well. But unlike one of the things that I think makes Bester different from PKD and Von Vogt is that he's not plotting with the I Ching or by dreams, you know, which Von Vogt, one of the reasons why his books are so fucking insane is because he would be like, oh, I dreamed about a red ball. So now the novel is going to be about a red ball. And, you know, so some of the Von Vogt novels just take left turns that are just insane. And so,
You know, I've only read Null A.
oh, really? Yeah.
Is there one that you'd recommend above others?
The Voyage of the Space Beagle, I would say, is another one. But Null is the one that I've read the most recently. So, but yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like, I think the next way that we got to go is talk about how Bester is commenting on Frankenstein, The Island of Dr. Moreau, Golden Age science fiction. He is using this text and the structure of, because, and maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but you have Gully, who starts the book as a prisoner and a simpleton and like
stereotype common man. That's
stereotype common man.
Super.
And like a science fiction writer, he's traveling the stars with his mind at the end. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's what makes the novel kind of cool, is that his main character is becoming, you know, and at the time, like the Superman storylines with Campbell, like if you wanted to get sold with Campbell, you sell him a Superman story, right?
Right.
And so Bester, in a lot of ways, he starts off with the jaunt thing. And like while I was reading it, I kind of felt like the jaunting kind of got lost in it. But then when it comes back, I know this is a lot of words, but I'm processing that I just finished reading this book myself, you know.
There's a point where jaunting, which is ridiculous, incidentally. Yeah. I mean, the epitome of a goofy sci-fi sort of motif. There's a point where I remember reading it originally thinking like, you know, this is a MacGuffin, right? It's just.
And when did you read this originally? How long ago did you read it?
Probably mid-90s.
Right, and I guess I should have asked like why you chose like.
Oh, so you know, I talk about it at the end of the book. It's right when I didn't get into science fiction literature until I started graduate school. I was, you know, as a kid, I was into movies and stuff, Star Wars, Star Trek, that sort of thing, but not that much. Maybe Star Wars more than anything. And when I went to do my master's degree in English at UMass Boston, I met this guy, Bob Crosley, who became my mentor. Great guy, who basically I did an independent study with him, and he gave me a bunch of books to read, and it was science fiction based, and I didn't know anything about it. He's like, I took a class with him called End of the World. It was an apocalyptic literature class, and I liked the stuff we read, and he just assigned. Another book was we were talking about Le Guin before we started today. Was you know, Left Hand of Darkness. But Bester, The Star's My Destination was one of them. So, and that's it. And I liked it so much, but I was so, you know, I'm kind of, the voice that I use in my critical companion's a little bit over the top. I'm not quite as enthusiastic about any book, let alone The Star's My Destination, as I purport to be. But when I was younger, I was so easily influenced, and this one in particular, I loved it so much. I started writing a screenplay. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, you know, but whatever. I figured, I don't know what I figured. I thought I could do anything. But above all, I just had this feeling like, boy, there's something about this book that I really love, and I kept coming back to it over the years. So it had to do with Bester's, what's he doing in terms of the science fiction genre with this book? Like, what does this book do? How does it function?
Well, and how's he commenting on the mega text? You know, I mean, like, this is pre-David Pringle's Guide to Science Fiction and whatever, but in 1955, he was using this story as a meta-textual comment on the genre, basically, right? So... yeah, which is often overlooked when people talk about this book.
Right. And, you know, when it came out, people realized what it was. They realized it like I did when I read it for the first time. Let's see, 40 years after it came out. It was what came to be known as, and I can't remember, this seemed to be more unique to Bester than anybody else, but I could be mistaken, an instance of pyrotechnic fiction. Have you ever heard that expression before?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've heard that before. Yeah.
But when I hear that term, for me, it actually ties in with this whole business of meta-narration that Bester is involved with. And he wrote a lot of essays about the science fiction genre, and specifically, he didn't often name names. Sometimes he did, but for the most part, he took issue with science fiction, mid 20th century science fiction editors, publishers, authors, and readers. And he basically took them apart. And he was like, this is why you guys are stupid. This is why you're silly. This is why this genre is going to tank if you don't do something different.
Right, which is probably one of the reasons why you have like Maltzberg saying in the same breath, he was a son of a bitch and he was the best among us, like in the same sentence, right?
Right. And I must say, so I won't name names either. And I worked with several editors on my book, one of which took offense to the Besterian tone that I adopt, which essentially, this editor took it personally. And, to put it crudely, Bester kind of came out and said, look, you're all worse than children, you people that are involved with this science fiction business. You don't know what you're doing. You're stupider than me. And you should follow my lead. And nobody's doing it, so fuck you. And he said this basically in essay after essay. And then, he proceeded to leave the genre for a while. But every time he came back, based upon the success of Stars Alone, but also The Demolished Man, which did win the Hugo.
Yeah.
He was always welcome back. And I don't know, it's like people had Stockholm Syndrome or something, because then he'd write some more essays and beat some people up again and disappear, and then he came back. So at any rate.
Which, by the way, is very in your wheelhouse, too. I mean, speaking as the guy who wrote the essay in the front of the Barry Maltzberg reedition, declaring science fiction in the 21st century as dead. So,
I say that it's dead now, but that it's, and again, I'm going a little over the top in that introduction, but I do believe to some degree that science fiction is a 20th century phenomenon. It's a historical artifact. Not to say that people aren't, tweaking things nowadays and doing some things. I can't even say, because I don't read much contemporary science fiction. Most of what I read is in the 20th. Actually, most science fiction exists in the 20th century.
Right.
I think it's still labeled science fiction, but if you think about it, yes, there's always new ideas out there, right? There's always ways you can tweak technology, let's say, and move further into this future or that or future or this alternate reality or whatever.
Well, and I had that experience with, every once in a while I'll say, like, for example, Neil Asher's The Skinner. I'll say, I always refer to it as one of my favorite 21st century science fiction novels. And people are always like, well, why are you pointing out that it's 21st century? And it's because I like 20th century science fiction so much more, and I think it's important to make the distinction, because I think you're right. The 20th century is so crucial and important to science fiction, in the same way that if you're talking about, for example, War of the Worlds or Time Machine, that it's 19th century, like pre-science fiction, that, Gernsback hadn't even given it the name. Don Wollheim hadn't even put it on the cover of the first book to have the term science fiction on it,
Well, it was, and those were Wells's scientific
romances, yeah.
And then Gernsback, what do you call it? Scientifiction, I think.
Yeah. Well, technically, Don Wollheim was the first to use the term science fiction on the Pocket Guide to Science Fiction in the 30s. Oh. And so he was the first to use it on the cover of a book.
Let me make one more point about 21st century science fiction. Here's the thing. Here's my biggest problem with it. I think, and Ballard was saying this in the 60s, in order to be new, and this is something I try to do in my own fiction, to genuinely make it new, let's say, the Ezra Poundian make it new sort of initiative. Inner space is where it's at. That's how you do it. I'm not talking about like experimental fiction where you're fucking around with the organization of text. I don't give a shit about that. People are not doing interesting things with inner space like they could, I think, in the 21st century with science fiction. All that other stuff, everything we've mentioned so far are motifs that have been done before. If you're going to do something new, and it's not outer space, it's here. I mean, you can do both, obviously. Bester does, as you indicated in Stars, right? It begins in outer space and it becomes more of an exploration of Gullyfoyle's inner space, which is one of the main reasons that I really like it. Bester's, there are some vague experimental efforts in that book where he integrates image as well as does some things with text. I could care less about that. They don't even need to be in there. In fact, I think they denovate what his innovations in that text.
He really was. I mean, can we name names who he's pointing the finger at? I'm sure he's pointing at your Wollheims, your Judy Delbert. Yeah. Yeah. Do we know who he's really pointing the finger at? I mean, is Campbell
with Campbell, there was only a few occasions where he named names, and I actually didn't know the names. I mentioned them in the book, in my book. And he did, it was an essay, and I think he did something like Hemingway and A Movable Feast, where he used different names, but the people that he was talking about clearly knew who they were, as did everybody else within the historical context of when it was published. But, there were occasions where, and I mentioned this in my book too, he talks about, Asimov, Bradbury, a few other folks that he respected, but he can never just say, this dude's great. And it's always a dude. He doesn't, he's not into female writers, let alone writers of color, but that's another issue.
He's not commenting on Lee Brackett or C.L. Moore.
I couldn't make that broad generalization because I don't know specifically, but I do know that he talked more about, white boys. So, but he could never just say something nice. He always had to say, even Asimov, who I think they were buddies, he would say, well, I forgot what he said specifically, but he gave him a nice compliment. And he said, but, he sort of sucks at this. He couldn't let a sleeping dog lie ever.
Interesting.
From what I could gather, he was a kind of pyrotechnic guy. The character of his actual persona sort of reflected what he wrote about, and certainly wasn't limited to Stars and The Demolished Man. I would say that most of the fiction of his, which is most of his fiction that I've read, is pyrotechnic.
All right,
again. Started with that.
Well, let's talk about like some of the different like little parts of the book that make up the style and the thing. So we've already talked about the jaunting, which was a little ridiculous. Yep. So the idea that in this future, it's funny because it's set up as world building in the beginning that people can teleport anywhere they want in this future, and it kind of sets up.
I was thinking about it.
Yeah, just by thinking.
But there are rules. There are rules. You can't just. The main rule is that you can't jaunt more than what? Not off planet. You can't jaunt off planet or you'll explode or something. And then you can't go more than like 1,000 miles. Completely arbitrary. And you have to actually see wherever you're going to jaunt. You have to in some way have been there or seen it in order to properly imagine it. Otherwise, you'll explode again. Again, all this is bullshitty science fictional artifice, right?
Right.
But my argument is he knows what it is. And there are various ways in the book that he calls attention to it being bullshitty science fictional artifice. That's part of his meta project in this. Again, I guess it doesn't matter if he intended it or not, it's there. That's my point.
Yeah. Bester's doing here is he knows it's bullshit. That it's, that other parts of the story are going to be taking the science fiction of the future a little bit more seriously, but he doesn't really care because, you know, the weirdness of the jaunting, it doesn't matter because he's setting up a surreal future anyway. So he doesn't have to have it make perfect, logical, hard science sense. He doesn't care about that.
And it's that first chapter where he introduces jaunting provides or maybe it's in the prologue. There's provides a history of jaunting, how it came to be. People have critiqued that, even when it came, you know, at the time of its publication or around that time. But even then, people acknowledge that it's too over the top, right? It's too,
and it's an info dump.
You know? Huh?
Yeah, it's an info dump too that is against the rules now.
But
yeah,
it's right. But I think it was even, again, the degree to which he does it and gets away with it
is against the rules even then. Yep. And that's one of the things that's interesting about it, because he's, you know, just kind of sets it off and like says, yep, here's the world. And then what's interesting is because at that point I expected the jaunting to be a much bigger part of the book going forward.
Yeah. Right.
But the next thing that I have is the gutter speak is a huge part of this book. After the jaunting, we get that. Okay, so we have Gully Foyle as a main character who is he's got the tiger tattoos, and he's got like kind of the Mari thing, and the nomad on his forehead is a huge part of it. But I think
that just to provide context, though, that tattoo is on his face. He looks like a tiger, and I won't go into how he initially gets that tattoo, but then he gets it removed afterwards, that Maori mask on his face, and you can't see it except when he gets mad, and his face flushes red, which makes him look, I guess, either the scar or the skin around the scar gets red. I can't recall. At any rate, that's what happens there. It's a little it's a cool detail. I was really enamored by that when I first read it.
Yeah, and so the gutter speak is this thing that he's not a learned guy. He's a common man. He doesn't even know how to write or read, and he speaks this kind of like gibberish gutter speak language, and he has to kind of learn to speak. Like what was Bester trying to say with that?
So that's equated more than anything with class. Unlike a lot of, you know, even though like with race and gender, not a ton is said about it, what is said about those issues is very pointed. Class, however, there's a lot going on with class in the book. And that really connects Gully, the gutter speak, with his lower class status. And what it becomes, the main antagonist in the book, is that Pristine and his daughter Olivia, who Gully ends up falling in love with. That's the upper class. That's the aristocracy. This is essentially a neo-Victorian future that we exist in. And basically what we see happen is Gully, the prole, the speaker, the gutter speaker, crawl out of the gutter and work his way to the top where Pristine exists and rules with, the proverbial iron fist. But of course, what Gully does is he doesn't, kill Pristine and take over. He becomes an overman, a Nietzschean Ubermensch in the end, transcending the whole class system.
Now, was the tiger tattoos and the Mari thing, was that just a reference to the Blake, to Blake, or was that, or does it have a deeper meaning?
So certainly it's a reference to Blake. It came from some sort of story that Bester read where a guy actually, I can't remember if he was abducted by some tribe, but he had his entire face tattooed, and I might have even been against his will, like Gully.
Yeah.
And as a result, he was, his girlfriend or his wife or something didn't like him anymore. And Bester pulled from that narrative.
Which is great. I mean, it's cool for the book. It really works well.
Better book than in reality.
Yeah. Now, kind of a PKD aspect of it for those dickheads out there. I think the Burning Man, who's kind of going to, forward and back in time, and is just kind of showing up there is a really cool aspect of the book that at first you're like, don't really understand when you're reading it. You don't understand what's happening, but like this Burning Man imagery, I know you're a big fan of it, but it's one of those things that I related to the book even before reading it because I'd seen the images and I'd seen the things from other people who had read it, and drawings from the now very rare graphic novel that was out in the 70s. So what do you think he was trying to say with that?
I have that graphic novel. I spent a lot of money to get it too. It's hard to come by. Well, I mean, first of all, the Burning Man is Gully himself, right? It's Gully. At the end of the novel, he basically falls through this cathedral, which is burning in the rubble. And he kind of catches fire, or there's fire around him, I forgot. But then he proceeds to, because of this extreme sort of fear and dread and anxiety that he's experiencing, he's the first human being to jaunt through space and time, right? So right. What we learn in the end is that there are, I think, 4 or 5 points throughout the novel where he sees this Burning Man, which, as we are, shown in the end, turns out to be himself traveling time. And it's him basically kind of, you could say, teaching him how to become Zarathustra, right? Everybody is a kind of helpmeet for, even antagonists for Gully, to transcend the confines of himself. And this is one of the reasons that I really think, for whatever Bester was trying to do, that the book, in its historical context, does make a teeny step forward in terms of things like misogyny and racism. The idea is, if nothing else, the book calls attention to the fact that those things are all bullshit. It's all an illusion. It's all a construction. Look at Gully. Even this lowly troll can transcend that with a little education. I mean, that's a crude way of putting it, but that, I think, is one of the book's messages.
So a quote from your book, or something that you kind of talk about that really, it was the first thing that I wrote down while reading it, was the sci-fi megatext would look different without Freud. And, how do you think Freud, you talked about Freud's influence on the Demolished Man, but like this idea that sci-fi in general just wouldn't be the same without Freud, like it's kind of interesting to me.
I kind of argue that, well, not kind of, I think it's in this book, it's either in this one or the Minority Report one, that Freud's he's no different than a science fiction writer. There are some practical applications of Freudian psychoanalysis, but a lot of, he was just, it's incredible. I don't think, Freud's sort of everywhere. It is really incredible what he did and how prolific he was, but it's no different than what a science fiction novel does, for me anyway. When I read Freud, it cognitively estranges readers in the way that, if you recall that initial definition of science fiction by Darko Suvin, where there has to be some sort of novum for something to be science fiction. It's cognitively estranging. I won't get into all the dynamics of it, and there needs to be a novum. I mean, Freud does that again and again. And but to answer your question, tons of people were pulling from Freud, especially in science fiction, and just trying to kind of tweak his ideas for their own ends. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But you don't think that that's the case, that Freud's influence? I mean, Freud had influence in multiple fields, but there was a period there where he was really hot in science fiction.
Yeah, and I haven't studied him as
post-war, kind of in the 50s.
Right.
Yeah,
I haven't studied him as close as I know. Well, I mean, you've written a biography of Freud, right?
That's a biography of me more than Freud.
Yeah.
No, those biographies are jokes. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but you've thought more about Freud than I have. So
I've read most of his case studies and stuff, but I don't know. I still, to this day, I should start I should do an experiment where I teach a science fiction class and just assign, my students wouldn't know it. They don't read. I just assign Freud as one of the texts. And I'd be like, well, what is this, science fiction author doing? I don't even know if they probably think it was a fiction, for sure.
Right. Well, and listen, one of the through lines into talking about the gender issues that Bester kind of had, a great way to look at it is how silly he was about basically writing off the idea of women even liking science fiction. Because we know, especially if, we're looking at Dr. Lisa Yazik's work and all the recovery of women's science fiction, is he kind of implies that women that they don't even just like science fiction, when there was, dozens and dozens of regularly published, very active women science fiction writers, right? And Lee Brackett's one of the biggest names in the biz at this time. And it's like he's completely dismissing that they would even like science fiction, let alone that there's, women who have sold more books than him, right? And so it's an interesting way to see how he's dismissing women just in the genre itself, and then to look at how his paper thin women in this book are really, kind of ugly constructions based on this kind of paper thin ideas that he has about women in general, right?
Definitely. And they're stereotypes. But it's interesting. Gully, he constantly refers to Gully as the stereotype common man, but not constantly, 2 or 3 times in the book. But it is a recurrent reference. Whereas the women, as you suggest, all of the female characters are stereotypes of a sort. And I think what Bester was trying to do is to my mind, unsuccessfully. He was probably trying to tie that in with Gully transcending all these cultural constructions, but he fails in that respect. And I even cite, Bester said some just, shitty things about what women want. And I quote him at length. And it's essentially, the sort of Mad Men thing, that show Mad Men. Right up the product of his culture, you could say. But not that it excuses it. It's easy to say someone's a product of their culture. But there were, people at the same, like you mentioned, there were women doing lots of women doing lots of interesting things as well. And, he sort of fancied himself as this alpha male at the same time, and acted accordingly.
Where at the same time, Henry Kuttner is, and we see some things with like Henry Kuttner, that he and his wife, C.L. Moore, are both successful writers. And if I've got a copy of some books down here that they wrote together, where Henry Kuttner's name is enormous on the cover, and then it says with C.L. Moore, like super tiny. And it's like, the genre had its problems at the time.
Yeah.
Right? And so his generalizations of women were ridiculous. That's the thing. And it comes out in the text with the 2 very paper thin characters who, they're so paper thin that they could the problems with these characters could fly by you.
Yeah.
You're reading.
So there's 3 actually, or no, there's 4, but one of them is that girl, Moria, part of the scientific people. But we don't see much of her. And when we do see her, Gully almost rapes her. There's this whole thing with rape going on that's total, even in its context, is no good. And Bester had something was going on with him, because it bleeds into other stories, at least. That
he had rape in the title of one of his books, didn't he?
One of the books was Tender Loving Rape, that was eventually, it was published posthumously as Tender Loving Rage, if I'm not mistaken. So, he clearly had inappropriate issues with that. But the other 2 girls, or female characters in the novel, are 3, Robin Wednesbury, who basically, all of them are, again, helpmeets, right? That sort of kick him along on his journey towards being a star child. I'm going to stick with that Kubrickian metaphor there. But so there's Robin Wednesbury, Gisbella McQueen, and Olivia Prestine. And Olivia is the sort of grotesque albino, or she's characterized as such, who really wants, we learn at the end, she hates humanity because people treated her like shit when she was younger. Again, this is just summarized.
Right. And look, none of these depictions of women and the violence are okay. They're terrible. They're awful.
Bester couldn't, he had to sort of hide all that, right? He couldn't come up and say, and this is one of the problems I had with gutter speak too. It's not how gutter speak would sound. If it was real, if there was a real 25th century gutter speak, it would be a rain of expletives. It would be a creative sort of explosion of expletives. It would be. I'm sure there would be new fucks and shits by then. But in any case, the
new fucks and shits by then. Like, yeah,
what it's all about.
All kinds of new fucks and shits.
Right.
Yeah.
But, he could only say a certain amount. And I think he took great care even though Gully seems to want to rape every woman that he comes in contact with, it always ends badly with him and women in this book. And that is often the case with Bester's protagonists. There's always sort of strife of that nature. Again, I do think that we could make the argument that it's connected, and this goes back to Freud too, this whole notion of Freudian aggression that he's so fixated on and that really deeply informs his characters. What Gully does, and you could make this argument, despite, as you say, the sort of horrors of gender representations in the book, it's all tied into this effort to transcend it all,
Right.
Freudian aggression is, it's not Freud's aggression, but in Civilization and its discontent.
Yeah, an argument could be made that he's showing what a shithole Gully is as part of the process.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's critique through representation. Again, you could make that argument. I do think it's there though.
Yeah. And now
I do think he was trying to do that.
I actually had to quote you on this because the fact that you actually had to type the sentence, Bester was not a Nazi, but,
Oh yeah. Okay. I remember that was after one of his rants, right? I must have quoted I quoted him saying something about women, right?
Like
the
race vanishing.
Right,
Yeah, because the race vanishing concept of The Star's My Destination, would seem less ugly if some of the characters weren't so obviously white throughout.
No, this is what it seems like. This is what it seems like.
Well, because he suggests the idea that race has vanished, and then he has stereotypical,
my main
Indian character and a black character.
There's a few of those, but at the same time, race has vanished. What does that mean? Well, most people are white, right?
Right, exactly. That's why you end up having to say, he's not a Nazi, but it sure sounds like he's putting forward,
It seems like that 21st century, humanity is this kind of Aryan nation with a few black people and some Native Americans, as far as I can tell, and maybe one Asian guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. And
now he doesn't come out, and of course the narrator doesn't come out and say these things, and Bester doesn't go into too much detail in terms of what the quote unquote vanishing point, and I can't remember. I think that might be my expression for it. I don't know if he mentions it in the book, but if there is this vanishing point wherein difference disappears, what does it look like? And that's what I was kind of addressing and exploring in my
right.
Yeah.
Well, and another thing that you said in the book that I think really brings up a lot of issues, and obviously, clearly, we're getting to the kind of the end of and look, I really feel that people are going to get a lot out of, if they're already fans of The Star's My Destination, they're going to get a lot out of reading your book. But also, if they've never read it before and they want to read it and get a finer understanding for it, there's so much there to help out one of the things that you talk about towards the end is that he's kind of saying something about religion in every chapter of the book. He's commenting on religion throughout, which kind of sets up the ending, which we'll get to the ending in a little bit, but he's commenting on religion, different religions in different ways throughout the book. They can be subtle and missed, but this is something that you're obviously writing about. So talk to us about his commenting on religion.
Sure. I mean, he pulls from different religions, but his main beef is with Christianity. And this actually feeds into the whole Nietzschean holy man thing, too. Once again, religion is just another cultural construction. It doesn't sort of have any valence or meaning in and of itself. Well, I guess this is what I what I think and what is sort of represented in the book. It is, an illusion, basically, something that needs to be transcended. One of my favorite expressions of Nietzsche's is, or aphorisms, mankind is something that needs to be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? And that might be the biggest thing that Bester in this book is connecting or hitching to this whole notion of transcendence, right? Ultimately, right. That's what, if there was a main theme, that's what I would choose: transcendence of class, of gender, of race, of religion, right? Of all of our sort of institutions and apparatuses that we put into place for various reasons. Something like religion. Well, I have my own. As I get older, I tend to have stronger beliefs about belief of any kind. My thesis, personally, is belief is the end of reason, the beginning of evil. If you look at the history of humanity, of course, well, what's responsible for more bloodshed than religion? And to some degree, the book is citing that thesis, asserting rather that thesis as well. By the time we get to the end, Bester starts throwing around that term belief. And what Gully comes to realize is not to believe in any sort of social institution or messiah. He says something like, I want to believe in belief itself, whatever the fuck that means. I mean, that's actually kind of stupid. But basically what he's saying, I think, is, I believe in me. I'm special now. I really worked hard
right.
to myself and transcend all this stuff. Here I am, and now I'm worthy of believing in myself and, leading a productive life.
Well, and, it's funny because I was thinking about this, and this must have pissed off Phil. And I'm wondering if Phil pointed to The Star's My Destination with Wollheim, because, a year later, he submits Eye in the Sky to Wollheim, and Wollheim's like, take all the Christianity out. And that editorial fuckery almost ruined Eye in the Sky, because the whole Bob and Baha'i faith thing instead of Christianity and Eye in the Sky is one of the worst cases of editorial fuckery. And I get why Wollheim did it. He didn't want to piss off Christians and Christian America, but in Phil's career, it's the worst editorial fuckery that he dealt with, right? And I'm wondering if Phil would have just been like, "Hey, dude, look at Stars My Destination a year ago."
What year is that, Scott? When was it?
57 it came out, so it would have been 2 years after Stars My Destination. And if Stars My Destination could be a major science fiction novel and kind of just put up middle fingers to Christianity, it
totally does. He equates religion with, sort of opiate of the masses kind of thing with the seller Christians. Bester directly equates them with drugs and hallucinogens and the whole, sort of leading up to psychedelic culture of the 1960s,
And I wish, because at that point when Phil did Eye in the Sky, he hadn't sold to anyone else. So he put up with Wollheim's shit at that point. But and look, I'm pro Don Wollheim in general, but I just think he made a mistake.
That's precisely the sort of editorship that Bester would have rallied against. And, I think a lot of it for Bester goes back to, he published this predated Stars. Oddie and Id was the name of the story, through Campbell,
Yeah.
And he was very enamored with him and all of this. And they had a meeting together, and he told him to remove, I think it was all the Freudian references from it. And Bester, this was when he was young. It predated all of his novels. This is when he was just trying to break in, right?
Right.
But at the meeting where Campbell was telling him, what he needed to do to get the story published, he tried to hook him on Dianetics as this, not just, as a writer, but as, a practice, because apparently that was,
the new thing then.
Hubbard's bullshit was, coming into prominence, and he was real big on that for a while. And Bester walked away from that meeting going, hey, Jesus Christ, what did I get into here? But he changed the story. And then a year later, when it was republished and he had the rights to it, he changed it back. So it's too bad Dick didn't do that as well,
Yeah, well, he had moved on, I think, and he had I've already written 4 other personal Cosmos novels since then. So, he probably saw it as I fixed that doing Ubik, and I fixed it doing.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I'm saying? Because he did all those other personal Cosmos stories, 3 Stigmata, whatever. But okay, so at the end, and we're getting to the end of The Stars My Destination, Gully's rise to godliness kind of invalidates God. It's a huge part of it, but that journey at the end is everything it's leading up to. And so it's funny because the big crescendo of the novel is a big middle finger to religion, which is one of the things that,
or at least, organized religion.
Organized religion, yes. But the idea of, this character becomes this, it can also be looked as a John W. Campbell superhuman thing too. It can be looked upon as now he's the ultimate star traveler. He's a star child. There's all kinds of different ways you can take this ending. Yeah. So let's talk about this ending.
Yeah, it's ambiguous. It basically, we see he's left in a state of becoming at the end. And again, as the Star Child is at the end of 2001, we just see this Star Child. Dave Bowman becomes the Star Child. We don't know what's going to happen after that. And that's in Bester's work. He does that. Same thing in The Demolished Man, right? He's demolished and he's got to be rebuilt in the end. And he did that in numerous stories as well. No, but you never see, and I mentioned this I can't remember which chapter it is. Gully metaphorically dies and is reborn at least 10 or 11 times throughout the book. And this is the last occasion. And basically, if you think about it in those terms, that's kind of his thing, is to die and be reborn. If he's reborn as a god, well, Gully ceases to exist. You can't go anywhere from there.
Yeah, and he already changed his name, and he, for part of his revenge plot.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So,
and the other thing is, how do you effectively, truly represent godliness? I mean, can you do it? And what does it look like? That's why one of the reasons, I think, one of the many reasons, Kubrick does, and Clark didn't do it in 2001. Nor do they do, I don't even know, 2010 or 3001 or any of it.
I have read all those.
I don't even remember 3001. In 2010, geez, I don't even know what the hell that is or what it's for. That's more.
Well, it's funny. 3001 has the same ending as Independence Day, which is kind of hilarious.
But, oh, really?
Yeah,
I don't remember it. But. No, for Gully's sake, it works in terms of the, at the end of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, what happens? Well, the whole book, Zarathustra's talking and philosophizing and all of this, and he's in a cave, right? And at the end, he comes out of the cave into the sunlight, and of course, that's where the book ends. Again and again, I mean, can you think of a book where somebody, becomes a god, not just like Superman or whatever, where they develop superpowers, but a sort of godlike, authentically transcendent being? I can't think of one. And then proceeds to go, I don't know, do some shit. I'm sure there's something that people have done on more than one occasion, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. For the most part, it kind of ends there. That's the end of the proverbial man. What is it? Man with a Thousand Faces? Our monomythic journey.
Right.
If you get involved in the God business, it ends when you become a god because there's nothing else to do and nowhere else to go.
Which is one of the problems why the sequels to, for example, for The Matrix never lived up to that last moment.
Precisely. You can make the argument there too. God, in the Bible, in the Christian Bible, God fucks things up again and again. And what happens when you become God? Well, it fucks up narrative. What are you going to do?
Because nothing, when Neo takes off flying at the end of The Matrix, is like your imagination's like, oh, well, now we've got this amazing story that's about to take place because Neo's become like a god in The Matrix.
But the thing, he hasn't, has he? Because in order to make the rest of the movies, they have to make him less godlike than he was at the end of the initial film.
Right.
That's the only way to do it.
Because at that point, he can't do a sequel to the story because it'll never live up to that moment of there's nowhere to go from there. Right.
Yeah. The Star's My Destination Reloaded.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if a movie got made, then maybe someone would try. But, but that being said, do tell people, because I think your press, what you're doing, you've also reprinted a bunch of the Barry Malzbergs. You've published James Reich, who I think his novel, Songs My Enemy Sings, has already been a Dick-like suggestion on the show. And I definitely think Dick readers would love that book. So tell people about AOP and what you got going on there, and how people can find you online.
James, incidentally, is going to be writing the introduction to my new biography on Nietzsche, which is going to be the fourth in that dipshit series. But he's actually a really wonderful literary novelist who I just love and certainly underappreciated. And working with other people recently out, or no, it's not out yet. There are review copies of a collection of essays by Nugent Bacon, an African-Australian, female writer of speculative fiction. And she actually has a writing text on writing speculative fiction. And several other books in the pipe. One from Steve Aylett. I don't know if you've been reading those comics. Yeah, apparently is writing comics exclusively now, but I'm going to do a reprint of his book of quotes from his own sort of megatext, the Aylett megatext, with some new content in there. And some other things through Anti-Oedipus Press. For my part, this book is out. The Bester Companion, that one on Minority Report, and then the Nietzsche book will come out next year. And I'm hard at work more than anything every day. Most of my days are consumed with Kubrick, who leaked into our discussion today, inevitably. Speaking of immersion, that's the only way I can do it. I completely sort of walk, talk, and think Kubrick. Right after this, I'll put I'm always going through the movies. I just kind of start them from the beginning with Fear and Desire and go all the way through to Eyes Wide Shut and A.K.A. and just keep sort of running them in the background while I do every day I do a little writing on that. Again, that's for Auteur Publishing. HarlanWilson.com, AntiOedipusPress.com.
David, I appreciate your time. I'm sure the listeners would really enjoyed this. The Star Is My Destination is a classic for a reason. Problematic, but also powerful. And I do think it is Dick adjacent in that they were both dealing with some of the similar things. And in 1955, when Elvis shaking his hips was enough to send the country into controversy, the fact that they were, that The World Jones Made and The Star Is My Destination came out in the same year, are signs that sci-fi was pushing boundaries in a way that was really cool. So,
and just to leave on this note, I mean, one of the things that Bester did effectively, especially with The Star Is My Destination, is kind of lead into the whole new wave and new wavers and cyberpunks really took to him. He was definitely a predecessor and this book, probably more than any other, really informed those movements.
Professor Wilson, it was wonderful to have you. please return to the DickHeads podcast whenever you feel like it. And I'm sure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
And as always, DickHeads, keep it paranoid. Stay paranoid.